Wow, there was some amazing drumming. Welcome everybody, and thanks for tuning in to onlinelessons.tv to this live session masterclass. My name is Christoph Körner, and we couldn't be more stoked about the artist we have here tonight in our little studio. As always, you can ask questions in the chat below the video, so feel free to do that. And just in case anybody of our viewers does not know who the drummer is that's here tonight, sitting next to me, Keith has been playing with some major artists like Steely Dan, and with them for a really long time, John Mayer, Sting, and Toto, to name just a few. And you've won several Modern Drummers Readers' Polls in various categories, and you've been highly in demand for a really long time now. So thanks for being here, Keith Carlock.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Before we get into all the fill-ins and amazing drumming you just did, let's start with talking about your backstory. How did you get into drumming? You're from a rather small town in Mississippi called Clinton, and what were your first connections with music, and when did you choose the drums as your instrument? And maybe at which age did it make click and you knew, I want to make this for a living?
Yeah, you're right. I came from a really small town in Mississippi, and there's a rich culture of music there, so it was just a lot of music around all the time. So I think that just kind of got into my blood. My parents weren't musicians, but they were music fans, and my sisters as well. They always had records playing in the house, and I just got turned on to what they were listening to. I think watching late night talk shows like Johnny Carson back in the day in the 70s, you know, they always had great guests, especially Buddy Rich was on there a lot. And, you know, I just started catching the bug really early. And, you know, maybe the animal on the Muppet Show or something.
Okay.
But I just was one of those weird kids that just had a passion at a really early age. I just found it early, and I just knew that that's what I wanted to do pretty much from, you know, a very early age. I probably got my first snare drum around 5 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, you know, my parents would get me those toy kits that with the paper heads and the really bad sounding cymbals. They'd last like a day or two,
Well,
you know.
Yeah, they break really quickly.
So that was, you know, typical, just knew I wanted to be a drummer, just banging on pots and pans, the whole usual cliche story.
Okay.
And I think just being in Mississippi allowed me to get a lot of different musical influences, you know, because of New Orleans being nearby and Memphis being nearby and all the rich stuff that came out of Mississippi, and a lot of blues and R&B and soul and that kind of thing.
Okay.
And yeah, it was just from early as I can remember, I knew I wanted to play.
Okay. So you moved on then, you decided to study the drums, and you moved on to North Texas State University, and you studied there with Ed Soff, who just a few weeks ago retired from
That's right.
teaching.
Yeah, that's right.
And I found that an amazing piece in your biography, because Ed is a jazz player, so you consciously decided to study jazz. Can you explain maybe why that choice?
Yeah, just to, right before that though, just to get back a little bit further, you know, growing up, I always played in bands. I was always, you know, luckily I found some players in my neighborhood that were always, I was the young guy. They were much older than me, but they took me under their wing and kind of coached me on how to play in a rhythm section and playing with a bass player and just learning all that stuff really young. Starting from around age 10, probably, I was playing in bands, you know, and these guys were in their 20s and 30s. So and I
you
even
were a quick learner too, probably.
Well, I had a natural ability, but I needed to be in those situations, those real situations, to learn how to play musically, you know. But so that was a great education, just that. And then I was mostly playing rock music, soul music, some R&B and blues, funk, whatever you want to call it. But I didn't really know much about jazz. I had some great teachers that turned me on to listening to straight ahead stuff and and more fusion stuff I got into even before that. But one of my teachers had gone to North Texas and recommended it, and I knew about Ed Sof. I'd heard about him being a great educator and as well as a great player. Definitely. And so I chose North Texas, and it was the best choice I could make looking back. I mean, I'm so glad I went there because not only was the school really jazz heavy, which that's what I wanted to do. That's why I went there. I wanted to study jazz. And Ed being there, so being a great jazz educator. So that was really a life changer because I was able to figure out what that jazz thing was and just kind of put it in the pot with all this other stuff that I'd been playing for a lot longer, and just kind of mix it together in a way that works.
Your drum idols already changed, or did they change during studying, or was that prior to that? Like you said, you were into rock music and fusion music before, and then you were really going into that jazz thing. Did that change, or at which age did that change happen, if so?
Yeah, well, as soon as I got to college, I think there were so many students that were listening to jazz, and it was just everywhere. And so I was getting turned on to all kinds of players that I didn't really know about. And, the first thing that really hit me were people like Elvin Jones and Tony Williams and Jack DeJohnette. I later got really into Bill Stewart and then the school, really taught to go back to where it all came from. So we would go, way back further than that, and
so that was
Philly
the stuff
Joe and
you
like
were
that.
studying then as well.
Yeah.
Like from the early jazz days going into more modern jazz.
Exactly.
Okay. And what was the biggest takeaway from that time with Ed Sof for you?
Well, it was a lot. I mean, it changed my technique completely because I was more rigid before those days. I played more wrist stroke, a little more tense and tight kind of technique. And he taught the Moeller Technique, and it just opened everything up, and it really stressed the natural rebound of the drums. And so that changes the sound too. It changes the sound of everything. And then just learning how to play on a open tuning kit with the bebop tuning and the no muffling in the bass drum, all that was new to me. So that was becoming very influential.
Well, you sticked with it.
In a way, I did. Well, yeah, when I can do it,
sound-wise.
But yeah, it's certainly a part of my thing is the open tuning. So I think Ed really changed that, and then just conceptually, the way that he teaches, there was so much information that was about playing music on the drums. It wasn't just learning patterns and coordination and exercises. It was a lot of musical concepts that were really cool. Like I never thought about it that way before.
Okay.
So it opened up a lot of doors,
You obviously are doing now. If you play solo, that's just what's happening. It's like very musical placement of phrases and playing with that. Yeah. So the next step for you was when you left North Texas State University, you moved to New York. Again, a very conscious decision because you wanted to work with some musicians you highly admired at that time, or still do. And you got in touch with Wayne Krantz soon after. And actually, you landed a steady gig, which then went on to like 6 years. You played a weekly gig at that 55 bar in New York. And how did that come about? Maybe you can quickly share with us how that happened. And I guess it takes some courage and probably persistence for a new guy in town to show up at such a gig and get in touch with all those guys. How did that happen?
Yeah, well, Wayne was one of the guys that I really loved that was in New York. There was a lot of players that I was really a fan of, Wayne being one of them. And when I moved to New York, that was just one of my goals, was just to try to get in touch with him and see if there was any way we could play, and I would go down to the 55 bar. He would play occasionally on Thursdays. Back in those days, it was maybe once a month, if that.
Okay.
So I would just keep looking at the calendar to see when he was going to play, and I would go and love watching the gig. But I'd also just go up and show my face, shake his hand, and say, "Hey, I'm this kid that just moved here, and I want to play with you." But not like that. But just basically showing my face and showing my interest in what he was doing.
How old when you at that time? Were you?
I was probably 24.
Okay.
24, 25. Yeah. And so I just kept kind of bugging him in a mellow way, and then finally he called me, and we got together duo, just him and I at a practice rehearsal space in the city. And we connected really well. I had checked out his music so much that I knew a lot about what he did, but I had a long way to go for sure. But it just connected, and eventually he called me to play a gig at the 55 on a Thursday night.
Okay.
And it just went from there, and then eventually it became a band with Tim LaFave on bass and a steady Thursday night, like every Thursday.
Yeah. So maybe that was the second big school thing in your life that happened. It's not actual school, but it's the real deal. And playing with Wayne is highly educative, I could imagine.
Definitely.
And Wayne Krantz, if you don't know him, check him out, because he's probably one of the most underrated guitar players on this planet. And his band is very jam-oriented, leaves a lot of space to develop ideas and interact amongst the musicians. And it seems such a setting is a preferred playing style of yours. Is that correct? And also, could you describe how that band got to the level it's known for? Because you guys were doing some really shocking stuff, like changing to a completely different tempo on some hidden cue, or maybe not so hidden cue, but you were a really tight unit, and that's really amazing. How did that happen? How did that come about?
Yeah, well, it became a band, like a real band, which was important. It was, like I said, Tim LaFave and myself, and that was the trio. And playing that much for those many years, it just developed something over time. We rehearsed at least once a week when we could, and it was mostly Wayne's concepts and ideas. I mean, he was definitely the leader, of course, in his music. But eventually it just turned into this sound that we had together. So at least I felt like I was a part of something, and that was a really big creative outlet for me. And it gave me a chance to explore new ways to play grooves and improvise, and because most of it was improvising. So that was really great. That was a very, it was like another school, like you said. But it developed into this language that we had together, and we had all these different cues that Wayne would do. He was like the James Brown of that band. He would do all these cues where he would just tell us, we stayed together knowing where we were in the phrase, which meaning within an even 8-bar kind of framework. Yeah. So he would just turn around when he felt like he wanted to do something else with the music, and just say, up or down or way down, and meaning the tempo was going to shift at the top of the next phrase on one.
So you also had a cue like for more energy, similar to up down, or did that happen organically?
It could be for that. It could have just been that we kind of weren't finding anything where we were. He just wanted to kind of push the reset button, so to speak, to just start over from something else at a new tempo. It wasn't mathematical or anything. We would just kind of shift automatically, and just, that was what was cool about it, is we got really good at it, at just shifting and locking in right away.
It sounds simple, but it's really, really hard to do. So, yeah, and it takes a lot of open ears.
Yeah, and we did it a lot, so it just got really natural for us. But there were many other cues. That was just one of them.
Okay,
we had all kinds of things that would change the shape and the shift of the music.
Yeah, a great example of that trio playing is the 2005 Modern Drummer Festival. It's just great seeing you guys interact. I think that's the most fascinating aspect of that trio, because it shows 3 extraordinary musicians interacting with each other with really open ears. And yeah, maybe that, as you describe, it's something that can't be rehearsed alone, but it just evolves through jamming and working together a lot.
Yeah.
Cool. So the 55 bar gig was also what got you in touch with Donald Fagen and Walter Becker of Steely Dan.
That's right. Yeah.
And you played on the title track Two Against Nature from their 2000 record. How did that come about?
Well, Wayne had actually toured with Steely Dan in 1996, I believe. So they were aware of Wayne's group, and they were fans of his music. So they would come down to the 55 and just listen to the band. And so I got to kind of know them through that situation. It was a very exciting time, by the way. I mean, there was so many people coming out. Donald and Walter being one of the,
Yeah, I could imagine it's quite scary playing in such a small club and those guys are sitting like 2 meters in front of you.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. But so that was great. I got to know them a little, and then eventually Donald wanted to play with us. He's actually sat in on a night with us there at the bar. He played Rhodes, learned some of the tunes, and it was great. Will Lee was playing bass that night. I was a fan of all those guys, so I was in New York maybe not even a year yet, and there I was playing with three of my heroes, and I'll just never forget it. And I remember thinking, if nothing else happens, this is still pretty cool,
Must have felt somewhat surreal maybe, yeah.
It did, yeah. But that's why I went to New York, because I knew those opportunities were there, and I had to be ready for it,
Well, you obviously were up to the task, so okay. And then the call to work on Everything Must Go came in after that a few years, or?
Yeah, well, I failed to mention the other part of your question before, but yeah eventually they called me to do some recording, and I ended up making one track on the Two Against Nature record. I played on that title cut.
Title track.
And that was a great feeling, just to have a credit on a Steely Dan record. That is such a feather in the cap for any musician, It's really highly respected. And so that was great. It really felt good. And, didn't really expect anything more after that, but when they were going to get back to recording again for Everything Must Go, they called me to do some of the first sessions. And that was actually, let me go back a little bit, because they called me to do a song, one track for what was going to be a Joni Mitchell tribute album. And they did the song Carrie from the Blue record. And of course it was in a more Steely Dan style. It was really cool. So we did that in one day, got the drum track, and they overdubbed everything. Or maybe it took a few days, but we got most of the basic tracks done in one day, and then they were going to finish it out, on their own with overdubs.
Okay.
And that's, I think, something that became attractive to them, instead of hiring, I guess, a different rhythm section for every song like they always had in the past. So anyway.
Did that ever get released?
It never got released that I know of.
So there's some treasure in some basement.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So who knows if it'll ever come out? I don't know. I don't know the story. But that is what I really feel gave them the idea that with that group of people that at that session, we could use these guys and track the new record this way. So that's what happened. They called me to do maybe the first 3 songs. And
so when you got the first call, you didn't know at all that you were going to record the entire album, which it ended up in the end.
No, not at all.
Okay.
But we would do 2 or 3 on that first date, and got 3 tracks that they liked, and then they were going to finish them out. It felt good to be there again, and that they called, and then I waited maybe another month or 6 weeks, and then I got another call,
Okay.
I never expected. Pretty much the same rhythm section. We went in and did 3 more. So it continued like this, and it just kept going and kept going. and then soon we had recorded, I don't know, 11 tracks, 12 tracks, a couple of tracks that didn't make the record actually.
Okay.
So those are out there somewhere too in the vaults or whatever. But yeah, it was nothing expected, and it was pretty amazing feeling to be on the whole record that time.
And how detailed were the informations you got prior to recording? Like, did you surely got demos, or were there jam tracks also, or did it vary from track to track?
It varied. I think sometimes I would get a demo ahead of time.
Okay.
Most of the time, and a chart. Most of the time it would be at the session itself. So we would listen for the first time and look at the chart. I would make notes and just go out there and try to get a track that worked for them as quickly as possible.
Okay.
So. And
did you adjust your drum sound for that session, or did you go with your standard open drum sound?
No. That music really needs a tight sound, So yeah, we would use muffling on the snare and the kick drum for sure. I left the toms a little more wide open, but the kick and snare have to be tight and really, precise in the track like that for it to work, I think, and it did. But pretty much everything else was the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
But talking about versatility, because you obviously are rather versatile, you worked with all kinds of artists. I mentioned Sting, but you also worked with Toto or James Taylor, who is really different from the other artists again. And quite a different skill set was required when working with James, I guess. He's a great singer-songwriter, and I could imagine your playing needed a lot less density and a much softer touch. How do you manage to adapt so well to all those various situations?
I think it's just from all the experiences I had in school, growing up in different situations, and really learning to get a different touch when I was studying jazz in college. Because if you're playing with a piano trio, you can't dig in like Elvin would. You really it's a different touch to play with just a piano trio. Just things like that. I had a little taste of it, and so I could just kind of look back at things like that and then make adjustments. But I'd done a lot of gigs where you had to play quiet, so I worked on having a consistent, nice feel, but not hitting so hard, and more groove music. But yeah, James is a national treasure. I mean, he's, just unbelievable. And I remember getting the show tape ahead of time because I was coming in for Gad because he had to go off and do prior commitments with Clapton.
Okay.
And so it was a real honor to...
That's big shoes to fill.
Yes, of course. And I got to say, I have a lot of experience coming in after all these legends. So it's just like, I was like, okay, here we go again. But yeah, it was an honor to do that and to be there. But it was, I learned a lot. It was really great. Amazing band.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you also recorded the last Toto album, which again is a total different thing from the other artists mentioned. And you showed me some lead sheets you've done for that. And how much prior to recording did you get those demo tracks?
Well, a lot of it would be like the night before I left to go to LA to do the recordings. And I would just have to
that
cram
sounds
it.
really frightening because their music isn't always in 4/4. That's
true. Yeah, I would have preferred to have it sooner, but I think it was just the time restraints they were in, and that's just how it worked out. But at least I got it ahead of time because some of it was more involved, and I always like to. I don't think they had charts, so I always like to. If that's the case, then I always like to write my own form chart, just so I have something to guide me as I'm tracking, because it wasn't really enough time to memorize it like I would have liked to have. So that's what I do. I just write out a form chart, make some little notes, and then as we go through it, they might say some comments, and I'll make notes and just kind of get my map together. But yeah, I was writing them on the plane over to go to the sessions.
That sounds really crazy, but yeah, you obviously did a good job. And so you were trying to go along with the music as much as you could, which maybe sounds a lot easier than it was.
Yeah, and they had some good guide tracks. You know, they had good demos that gave me a good vibe of what they were looking for. So that's always helpful. You know, they're musical guys. They know what they're doing. So what they gave me made it easy too, you know, easier.
Okay. So we have a user question, but I think you somewhat answered that already. It is about the Wayne Krantz trio during a live improvisation and applying changes of musical direction, such as tempo, dynamic orchestration. Do you have kind of signs or musical phrases that suggest a change that is coming? Or was it just like Wayne saying way up, way down? Or was there also some musical cues? I guess both was happening.
There might be some musical cues every now and then, but that would generally be going back to like the written sections. But when we're in the more jam improvised stuff, it was mostly Wayne turning around and giving a verbal cue, and we had many of them.
Yeah.
You know, over the years there was many different ones. So yeah, it was just a verbal thing, and then we would just know that at the end of that phrase is when that would happen, whatever it was.
Okay.
So yeah.
And you're also quite the shuffle master. We talked about this earlier when you recorded some stuff for the course that's going to be up later. You explained some of the shuffle grooves you use and how you personally deal with the grace notes in the shuffle grooves. Could you just briefly show some examples of that, like various grooves you used or how you approach the grace note thing? And you got your own thing where you add a few grace notes or play more than are usually known for the groove?
Yeah, playing with Steely Dan, I play a lot of shuffle feels. The Perdy Shuffle, of course, in songs like Babylon Sisters, Home at Last, and then there's the more rock shuffle that's like Reeling in the Years or Black Friday. Mm-hmm. And then there's also the more traditional blues shuffles there's one called the Chicago Shuffle and one called the Texas Shuffle. And there's variations of that, but I'll just briefly show you the different ones.
That would be cool.
Yeah, so like the Chicago Shuffle has the shuffle in the hands. And it's 4 on the floor on all 4 quarter notes of the beat, and the hi-hat can kind of it can be a 2 and 4. It can be on all 4 beats. It can be the shuffle beat. It can be a lot of different things, but I'll just play a few examples like this. I don't want those on. So that's kind of like a medium tempo Chicago shuffle. So both hands are playing the shuffle, you know.
Yeah.
It's really more about the feel. It's not just the notes. It's finding that lope. And depending on the tempo, you know, if it gets faster, it gets more triplety. But if it's slower, it's more of that in-between kind of New Orleans 8th note that's not really triplets and not really straight.
You can't really write it down.
Exactly. So it gets into that too, which is really cool. And then you have like the Perdy Shuffle, which is a halftime shuffle. He played it more like this, where the shuffle is here, and the grace note plays the shuffle beat, which is basically the, well, I won't call it that. It's like the second triplet, right? Mm-hmm. So like this. And then the backbeat is in there, and you have to add another grace note afterwards to to catch that.
Fill the gap.
Yeah, to catch that that second triplet. So it sounds like this. I have such a habit of adding to it, so a couple of times it kind of switched around. But what I do is I just add a few more notes. So my pattern is generally more like yeah, and then you know, I'll quickly just show you the rock shuffle is just, you know, the Perdy is more half time, the rock shuffle is more double time, so it's more like a. And there's many variations, but that's the ones that I play the most, kind of in that kind of feel.
That's cool. And oftentimes you use the hi-hat on the third triplet to play a little lift in there.
Right.
Which would support what the guitar plays.
Exactly.
Oftentimes in that.
Yeah, you just kind of bounce your foot on the quarter notes, and let it kind of just open a little bit. So when you play the shuffle, that's something that Bernard did. You know, I over-exaggerate it more, you know, but I got it from listening to him play. He just, because he's probably just bouncing his feet to the rhythm, and it just kind of created that.
Well, it works great.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Yeah. Let's touch on technique and sound. You obviously got great technique, and we already talked about the Moeller technique and how that opened up, like not playing in the drum, but allowing the rebound of the stick to happen. It seems your technique enables you to control all sorts of dynamics with great control, and I find it amazing that no matter which dynamic you play, your music always keeps breathing. It's like got this very musical and relaxed touch to it, even if you are at the peak dynamically wise. So that's pretty cool. Where is that control coming from, and does it derive from your work on rudimental stuff back in the days?
Yeah, I think rudimental stuff for sure. I did a lot of that, still do, and it was really big where I come from. Like there was just that type of marching band thing in all the schools, and it was just really popular. And so I have a really extensive training in rudiments and things like that, and then I would just try to apply it to the kit. The touch thing changed, you know, and I use kind of a French grip with the fingers, and then I use aspects of the Moeller with the whipping kind of motion when I want to get a little more volume. But everything that hits a surface is bouncing back by itself naturally. Yeah. So for me, it feels like I'm just bouncing a ball, you know. You're just playing the downstroke, the stick comes back. You know, of course, things change depending on what I'm playing, but generally, I'm trying to feel that sensation of just playing the downstroke and letting it come back. So, you know, just around the drums, it looks like. Really open-handed kind of
It
thing.
looks almost like you're playing timpani. That's the exact movement.
Yeah.
Did you learn that?
Exactly. Yeah, I studied
okay.
timpani a little bit, and that's where the French grip comes from. That's the way we were taught anyway, with the thumb on top.
Yeah.
So the rolls were. That kind of feeling, and then getting this motion happening, pulling the sound out versus bashing into it.
I guess the timpani is a great instrument to learn that technique.
It is, I think,
because
so.
you don't have any choice other than playing like that to get a good sound.
Yeah. So I just applied it to this. It's more of an orchestral approach because of that. More legato. I play a lot of doubles instead of singles, so it has that legato feel to it. It's not harsh. It's more. To me, it's more musical and pleasing, But if I need to have more power, I can single it out here and there. But I typically like the sound of the double stroke roll around the drums. But even playing on the cymbals with grooves, I'm always kind of thinking of that bounce, just like a simple eighth note groove over here, I'm just kind of letting it come back. So I just want to feel that. And it helps me with my time too, because that becomes
it
becomes part of it.
You got big motion, but the motion is probably helpful if you play extreme tempos like very slow grooves. I guess the motion helps keeping everything in place.
Yeah, just a more consistent flow happening because this stays as consistent as the actual playing part when it hits the surface. All that air behind it helps me to stay consistent or more consistent.
We got a ton of user questions. So talking about the shuffle, there was one request if you could demonstrate the hold the line groove.
Oh, hold the line. Wow, that is kind of a shuffle, isn't it? It's been a while since I've played that one, but I'll give it a shot. Let's see. Sounds funny with this bass drum, doesn't it? Something like that. It's been a while, but yeah, that's another kind of 12/8 kind of shuffle, you know, where it's kind of thing. I always like the. Those fills at the end.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
And talking about rudiments, you play a lot of very dense fills consisting of double strokes and singles. And there's like one signature fill you use a lot, which starts with 2 beats in the bass drum, and then you continue with 2 single strokes and 2 doubles. Could you demonstrate that pattern slowly and explain what's going on there and how you approach applying that? Because you got a very musical approach again, and it's not very mathematical, but you rather take that as an element and play with it and apply it in different variations, I guess.
Yeah, it's in its simplest form, it is 2 notes on the bass drum and then a right, left, right, right, left, left. So 2 notes on the bass drum, right, left. I'll use the toms for now. And then I kind of think of the right, right, left, left as it's lower and dynamic, and it's just a roll in between this accent that's happening. And sticking-wise, it's a double paradiddle, right, left, right, right, left, left. So it sounds like this. It's really slow. And so that would be the easiest way to get it in, in your playing, is to think of it like that. But now the way I look at it is I just look at that 4-note rough, meaning the 2 kicks and the right left. As an accent, and then the roll can just be any length in between, depending on where you want to put those accents. So that's how I really think of it now. Just a few examples in a phrase. Let's see. So yeah, I'm just always finding new shapes of ways to play it, and you can start with the bass drum or with the snare drum, there's just different ways to kind of use it. And then I add other stuff in there sometimes too, other rudiments in between, and
of course,
so it can become more than just that too.
Which explains, in a way, the way you solo, or how you approach solo, because that's an element that can often be heard when you do a solo. And in your solos, you use a lot of motives and melodic phrases and spacing. I guess 2 things where that comes from would be like your jazz studies, and the other thing, the Wayne Krantz band, which was based on 8-bar phrases. And you always keep looking for new variations of the same groove with that band, I think. And when I hear you solo, it sounds a bit like that is happening too. And also you use the shifting or reset button and all those stuff you learned in that band. You just applied to a solo context. Okay, cool. So you'll end with a solo, but before we come to that, could you give us a quick run through the equipment you are using?
Sure. I have all Zildjian cymbals. I have a 20-inch medium thin low ride, K Constantinople, a 22 K Constantinople. This is also a medium thin low. And then I have a K Dark Crash 18 and another K Dark Crash 19. And then I have 15-inch K light hats. And you may have noticed that I kind of crash on everything and ride on everything. So I try to pick cymbals that have good bell sounds and good crashes. I mean, these K Constantinoples are great crash cymbals.
I noticed the screws are really tight for the cymbals. Like, you don't like them floating around. You want them in place, or why is that?
I've just been kind of experimenting a little bit with that.
Okay.
I used to have it more flopping around, but it kind of it may dampen it a little bit, for the stick definition, but I'm not really sure.
Okay.
I'm just kind of experimenting with it.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, it feels good like that. So I'm just kind of, sometimes when it's too loose, it just feels like it's getting away from you. You're not getting the most control. And then as far as drums, I have a Gretsch USA Custom here. This is a 22. It looks to be a standard depth, I don't know, 17-ish. And then I have a 10, 12, 14, 16. And this is looks like a 14 by 6. A chrome over brass with it's hammered, the hammered chrome. And this comes with the kit. This is probably a 5.5 by 14 that I have tuned down lower than this one for, and kind of muffled up like that 70s kind of vibe.
So for that second snare, you distinctively go for a very different sound than on your first snare.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the point. And you know, it's kind of a trashier kind of low pitch, thuddy kind of thing. And did I leave something out? All DW hardware, DW pedals. I like the DW 9000 stuff.
So you got your own signature sticks?
Oh, yeah, I
I
do.
think so.
Thank you very much. Vic Firth, Keith Carlock model, yep. And, you know, I recommend you guys checking them out. We have this smaller bead that gets a really nice point on the cymbals, but you can also get a big sound with them. You know, it's not
Obviously.
yeah.
Great.
So
Keith, thanks so much for being here and sharing your knowledge with us. It's been amazing and a big pleasure. Before we get to your solo, a few announcements. You should check out the DVD Keith has made. It's called The Big Picture. You should also check out his homepage. There's a complete discography on that homepage going back through the early days till today. And those recordings are really amazing. Check out the artists Keith has worked with. It's really creative and inspiring drumming. Do check out the courses on Online Lessons TV, especially the courses we did with Keith, which will be coming up in the coming weeks. So make sure to sign up for the newsletter so we can let you know once those courses go live. And with that, I couldn't be more happy to listen to some more of your drumming.
thank you very much.